This video is about some new capabilities in CoCalc to better control compute servers. In particular, you can now set a number of different conditions that can cause your compute server to automatically turn off in order to save you money. And you can also set a health check to make it automatically restart in case something goes wrong. So let me show you how all of this works. First, here I am at CoCalc.com. Let's visit my projects. And I'll open this project where I do a lot of my development. I have tons of compute servers. So the first new thing that you'll notice that we've just released is that underneath every compute server, you'll see a little amount. And if you haven't set anything up, this is the grand total amount that you've ever spent on that particular compute server, or at least the total if you include the last, no, it's just the grand total amount ever. So I've spent $1.33 ever on this particular compute server. If you click on this, you can configure it with a spend limit, which is the first thing I want to show you. And the spend limit, when you enable it, well, first if you click help, you can see more. Actually, there's no info about that one. You see more info, sorry, if you click help and then click enabled, then you'll see more information. You can now configure the spend limit. And what this does is it allows you to make it so that if you spend up to a certain amount during a given period of time, then the compute server will be automatically turned off. So suppose you don't want to spend more than, $10 per day on a particular compute server. And maybe it's a compute server that costs maybe $2 an hour. So you could spend this in 5 hours. And you really plan to use it only for like 2 or 3 hours a day, and you're just kind of worried maybe you're going to forget to turn it off or whatever. If you set this up and then click save, then what happens is CoCalc's backend will now start monitoring all the purchases as they're going for this compute server. And if you hit $10 in the last 24 hours, it turns it off. It doesn't delete the compute server, it just turns it off. And then you can turn it back on if you want, but you'll need to readjust the spend limit because it'll just turn off again. So that's it. So that's the spend limit. And another thing is, while you're using a compute server that has a spend limit, there's a little slider that you see right here. So for example, with this compute server, I've spent $15.56 during the last week. Let's suppose my spend limit was $20. Then there's a little slider at the bottom, and it tells me how close I am to hitting my spend limit. Let's make it a little tighter. So say my spend limit is $18. It goes red when you're within 20% of hitting your spend limit. And then right when you get to the limit, it turns the server off. But I don't want this one to turn off automatically, so I'm going to set it back up to a healthy amount. Okay, so that's spend limits, which is one of the many ways that you now have to better control your spending on compute servers. There are a couple of other automatic shutdown things that you can configure. They're all configurable by clicking this ... menu, which you see in the compute servers page, or if you're using a document that happens to be on a compute server, you'll see the same ... menu over here to the right. By the way, notice that this $15.56, it also, and the slider also appears right here. So that's another easy way to access it when you're working with a document or a terminal or a Jupyter notebook. By the way, I'm going to start this one up just to get it going so I can demo a few more things. So let's go in here and take a look at the options under automatic shutdown and health checks. So there's a help which explains a lot of details about each of these. It's off by default, but you can click it, and then whenever you click enabled, you can see all the extra information. Note, by the way, when you click enabled and then start configuring stuff, nothing is saved until you explicitly click the save button. So you can make all kinds of changes. If you don't want to do it, you just click close, you just close the modal, and it says if you didn't make any changes. So nothing is saved until you explicitly click save. And also you can configure these various things and then enable or disable them as you wish without losing your configuration in most cases. So look, the spend limit I can okay, there's clearly something wrong there. For some reason it was toggling it. I will address that. Okay, but you can disable things and enable things. Okay, so let's look at some other ones. There's an idle timeout, which, as explained here, what happens is this doesn't look at the CPU or GPU usage. That's not what this does. What this does is it looks at actual editing of files, use of a terminal, use of a Jupyter notebook on the compute server. And if you don't do anything interactively through the CoCalc user interface for a configurable amount of time, and you can choose, whatever you want here, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, it has no impact directly on the price, unlike the normal CoCalc quotas, because you're paying as you go. So the more you use it, you just pay for exactly what you're using. So if I just set that to say 60 minutes, now what happens is a new timer appears right here, and it says that the server will stop a certain amount of time unless somebody actively edits it. So, and this is like a countdown. So it's about an hour from now. So it gives you an indicator of when it will shut down. So you can kind of keep an eye on this. And it adds a little bit of extra time initially when you're configuring it. And then when you interactively work with the console, every minute or two, that will get reset to the amount of time of the idle timeout. And if you just leave your server, you're not using it at all, after that amount of time, it just gets turned off. So this is another way of sort of controlling usage. I implemented this mainly because I think it's useful for students doing work in class on a compute server where they're working on a homework assignment. The university is paying for the compute server, or the student is, either way. And it's not something that's going to take hours and hours to run. So it's really mostly interactive work. The idle timeout is extremely useful because you set it up, and then when the students all have their compute servers, you'll never have to worry about them accidentally leaving a compute server running overnight and getting charged a lot of money, which is especially annoying with, say, a GPU, because those can be pretty expensive. This is probably the number one request by instructors for how our course management integration with compute servers will work. And I'll have another video in a minute about that. But in any case, that's the idle timeout functionality. And you can see that my timeout is now 59 minutes until it'll shut down, and it'll just keep going down until it gets to 0, and then the server gets shut down. And this is, of course, implemented on our backend, not in the browser. So if you just close your browser, it'll still get shut down after the idle timeout is exhausted, right here. And I'm going to now disable that. Boom. Now my idle timeout is disabled. The next feature is there's a shutdown time. So basically what happens if you enable this is that you can just give a time of day, and if your server is running at that time of day, so it started before that time and now that time of day suddenly occurs, then your server gets shut down automatically by our backend. So for example, if you, again, are only using your compute server for interactive work, like me with this development server where I work on development of CoCalc, then, if you know for a fact you always are asleep at 1 a.m., then you can just set that up. And now no matter what, if you were to somehow forget to turn off your server for some reason, it will turn off at that time. So let's just look over here. You can see there's a reminder of this because it says 1 a.m. and it just says the server is currently scheduled to shut down 15 hours from now at 1 a.m. So this is an easy way of setting things up so that a compute server will be shut down at the time of your choosing, and every day. So it's just like a little backup. It's probably my favorite of the automatic shutdown options, because personally my usage is really unpredictable, hard to tell if I'm really active. But the one thing I know is I don't like working on CoCalc at 1 a.m. or on development, because I'm just too tired to be effective. I'm a morning espresso sort of guy. All right. Spending limits, I already showed that to you. You can configure it as I showed you before over here or in here. It's exactly the same. You specify the period of time either on a day, week, month, or year basis and an amount. So, So the fact that's disappearing is a stupid little issue, which I'll have fixed by the time you watch this video. It's just being updated because the server's running. So it depends on how you think about your spending, what you want to do. But if you kind of budget for the month, then you might select a month. Year is basically all time, and it just gives you like a frame of reference for how to think about the spend. And again, not only does it limit it, but it makes it really easy to track the spend over the last week. So you always have a sense. So like for me, I know that I'm spending about $15.59 per week. Feels good, feels like the right amount of money feels like a ridiculous bargain for my 64 gigabytes of memory, 230 gigabyte SSD, and so on, with 16 CPUs that I use for doing development. So I just have a really good sense of how much I'm spending for a given time period. And, if something really weird were to happen and it gets out of hand, it will shut off the compute server. Okay. And now finally, the last thing here is health checks. Let me move out of the way. So here you can make CoCalc every 30 seconds or a minute and a half or whatever, run a command. And then if the command fails a certain number of times, if it fails a certain number of times, then it will do one of these actions, like reboot your server, stop your server, suspend your server, or completely delete it from existence, or rather deprovision it, which deletes the disk and everything else. So that's pretty, I don't know if you'd want to do that, but it's an option. And you can use this as a health check, like if you're running a web server and you just want to, do some sort of, maybe you can use it as a kind of standard health check. It has basically the same parameters as health checks in Kubernetes, except it runs a shell script or shell command, bash command line, instead of connecting to a network port. And often you could just have like a really simple command like pwd, or you could put an actual path to a shell script or a Python script or something here and then run that. And when the server's running, you can click test. And what that does is it just runs the command and tells you what the output is. So you can make sure that it's properly set up to run. Like for example, if I make it ls and I click test, it's going to output all the files in my home directory, as you can see on the compute server. And about some of these parameters, so this is the command that you'll run. This is how much time the command has to run. So for example, if it were a command that took 40 seconds to run, it would always fail because the timeout is 30 seconds. It'll try this many times, and if it fails this many times in a row, then it does the given action. And oops, again, there's like a dumb bug where it keeps resetting it unless you quickly save it, and I will fix that soon. So the second thing is it waits this long between checks. And the third thing is you don't want it to run the health check right when the server's starting up, or the health check will fail because it's not working yet, and then shut down your server. So that's extremely annoying. So by default, it waits about 10 minutes or 600 seconds before even starting running health checks. So here you are. These are just the defaults, but you can configure them however you want. Another good use for this is there are various ways to automatically shut things down as given above. But maybe you want to just look to see whether some task that you started is still running. Or you want to write a little script that checks on GPU usage using the NVIDIA SMI script. And if that usage gets small for a while, you automatically shut down your server because you're not using it. So you can write a custom script and then have it do whatever checks you want, and then it'll do the action that it's given. So this gives you extreme flexibility in terms of automatically shutting down or rebooting, or possibly suspending, like a laptop where it just suspends everything, but when you resume it, you get back where you were, your server. Okay. So that is all the different options. Again, there's a little issue which will be fixed by the time you see this video. Okay, so thanks a lot for watching. And again, if you want to use all these options in the context of teaching a class, I'll have another video soon about that. Bye.